Hello and welcome to coverage of Pro Tour Journey into Nix. I'm Marshall Sutcliffe. I'm in the booth with Zach Hill, and it is time. Top 8. It's Sunday. This is our first quarterfinal match. Josh Utter-Leyton, our reigning Player of the Year, managed to top 8 this event. This is not his first top 8, and his competitor, it's not his first top 8 either. Stanislav Cifka.
Yeah, we first saw Cifka break onto the scene playing the Eggs deck from Pro Tour Return to Ravnica. Ended up getting Second Sunrise banned. This deck, completely different from the Eggs deck, full of creatures, really aggressive, and frankly quite different from a lot of the decks we've seen in the feature match area.
Yeah, decks on pretty different ends of the spectrum here, as Josh Utter-Leyton is on what's essentially a control deck that's bug-colored, blue, black, green. And here's a nice start for Stanislav Cifka. He finds a favored Hoplite. But there's a nice 2-drop here for Josh Utter-Leyton as well. Sylvan Caryatid, one of the key cards in the block format here. Let's see if it's able to block this at this early stage of the game here.
Yeah, and like LSV said, I mean, you just want to play Sylvan Caryatid early and often from Josh's deck. It can block almost everything in Stanislav's deck until Stanislav is able to pump things up. We see only access to 1 mana. I think the question here is how aggressive is he going to be with those Gods Willing that launch the fleet?
All right, so first things first, though, he's going to attack, and Josh Utter-Leyton's not going to risk it. He's just going to take the 1 point of damage here. Cifka has a tap land for his secondary mana source at this early stage of the game. He can play in a Crone Crusader, and he's going to go ahead and do that. So a good start here for Stanislav Cifka. Remember, we're playing best 2 out of 3 here in the quarterfinals. And here's a key play, Zach Hill, Courser of Crewfix. The first one that we see on this top 8 Sunday, not the last one, though.
Yeah, I mean, this is exactly the kind of start Josh wants. I mean, the only thing he could have wanted more is a land on top of his deck to play with that Courser, but having the 2/4 means that Stanislav, again, is going to need some help. That said, he's got Ordeal of Porphyros, which is going to enable his creatures to attack into that Courser, at least is going to enable the favored Hoplite to do so. But right now what he wants to do, I think, is get that Phalanx Leader on the battlefield, make some tokens with a Crone Crusader, and just have one big turn with Launch the Fleet and Coordinated Assault to just get a lot of big guys on the table before Josh can draw out of this land stall. Cifka knows about Bile Blight, so he can't make too many tokens or they're all going to bite the dust. So a lot of decisions to make for Cifka with not access to very much mana in the scope of things.
You can see Bile Blight sort of ominously hanging out on the top of Josh Utter-Leyton's library. And Cifka's really tanking out here about what he wants to do for the coming turns. Remember, he's got a God's Willing in hand, so if he'd like to blank that Bile Blight, he can do so. The problem is that means he has to leave the mana up for it. That allows Josh Utter-Leyton to not only play around it, but it also means that Stanislav Cifka doesn't get to build out his board quite as aggressively. He's going to push that card to the bottom off of his Scryland.
You know what, this Cifka's deck reminds me a lot of the Affinity deck in Modern. You know, it's nominally aggressive. You have a lot of different creatures, but what you're really trying to do is assemble kind of a critical combination of attackers and spells.
All right, so kick things off with an attack with Favored Hoplite right into the Courser.
And he can get it big enough to kill the Courser with a combination of Launch the Fleet, God's Willing, Coordinated Assault. I think God's Willing Assault does it. That's going to keep Josh likely off mana, because if he draws that Bile Blight and doesn't have access to the top of his library, if Josh blocks, that means he's going to miss yet another land drop. The question is whether Cifka wants to let go of the God's Willing, knowing that Bile Blight's on top of the deck.
All right, no blocks. 18 apiece.
So if you're Cifka right here, the question is, do you just run out Phalanx Leader with no protection just to try and develop the board, or do you want to hold it in order for you to be able to pump it later so as to get value out of at least one of those triggers before it gets killed?
And the answer is no, you don't. So Stanislav Cifka ships the turn back with just his 2 creatures on the battlefield. Josh Utter-Leyton draws that Bile Blight. and reveals Unravel the Aether on top of his library. Here's Thoughtseize, though, for Raptor. He's going to take a look at what Cifka's working with. This is going to get him a lot of information about how and when to use the removal spells that he does have.
Yeah, Thoughtseize is actually really good in this matchup. Although Cifka's deck is aggressive, being able to take a critical quote-unquote combo piece, whether it's one of the pump spells, whether it's something like a God's Willing to make sure your removal's live, whether it's just a creature like Phalanx Leader that you know is going to be the key to Cifka's offense, Thoughtseize is very, very disruptive in this kind of matchup. Relevantly right now, though, even though Utter-Leyton has 2 mana open, cannot cast Bile Blight due to the temple not producing black mana. So Cifka has a little bit of an opening here, but he's going to lose his most powerful spell.
It's up to Josh Utter-Leyton to figure out exactly what the most powerful spell is in this exact situation. And he is certainly thinking that through right now. Cifka playing really the only aggressive deck that made it to the top 8 here, and it is easily the most aggressive deck in the field. Phalanx Leader is ultimately the choice, but there's a second Sylvan Caryatid as well to follow up for Josh Utter-Leyton. So the shields, they are up. He's got a 2/4 and an 0/3 and almost perfect information. There's one card that is going to be drawn by Cifka, but it is an unknown. He pushed his scry to the bottom, so it's a random card off the top of his library. That's the only thing that Josh has to worry about as far as unknowns for the coming turn.
One of the things we were talking about in this matchup was how comparatively weak the blue cards are. We see a pair of Ashiok's and a Prognostic Sphinx on Josh's side of the board. Not the best right now, but he's got enough defense that Ashiok could start to get to work if he has several extra turns. I think Stanislav is going to have to pull the trigger fairly soon now that Josh's second Caryatid is giving him enough mana to work with.
Yeah, I mean, Cifka right now is on Josh's end step trying to decide if he needs to start firing some stuff at a Crone Crusader and start making a bunch of tokens.
Yeah, he can put a +1/+1 counter on the Hoplite and make another token, but he says, no, I'm going to need to be able to do that in combat.
Draws Plains.
Now, he can get a lot of 1/1 tokens on the battlefield with a Crone Crusader and launch the fleet. The question is just knowing about Bile Blight. He's also got to make sure he can play around that with God's Willing, meaning he can't use the God Willing right now as one of the triggers.
Pair of Ashiok Nightmare Weavers in hand for Josh Utter-Leyton, along with a Prognostic Sphinx and, of course, the Bile Blight that Cifka is aware of. By the way, both of these players are ranked nicely on the top 25 pro rankings, with number 13 versus number 14 pretty well grouped here.
Yeah, I mean, just truly some of the best players active right now. Josh, this is a huge finish for him. Stanislav, been putting up solid results in addition to his Pro Tour win, but a return to Sunday means that Cifka can really be mentioned as one of the great players active today. A literal chess master, also, Cifka.
I think he's a grandmaster.
A grandmaster.
I think so. All right, he's tapped 2 mana. Things aren't moving at a blistering pace here, but they're going to start creeping along, and it's Ordeal of Perforos on favored Hoplite. We're playing block constructed here.
Yeah, this is not limited. This is block constructed. Now, Ordeal, he knows that Unravel the Aether is on the top of Josh's deck, but if Cifka activates another trigger with one of the cards in his hand, he could theoretically fire off the Ordeal right away. Instead, it looks like he's content just getting 2 counters out of it.
This does bring the favored Hoplite out of Bile Blight range.
Yeah, and also threatening lethal against the Courser if Utter-Leyton commits to blocking. One of the things about the Ordeals is actually really powerful against enchantment removal, because even if the Ordeal gets disenchanted, it still, the counters still stick around.
All right, so here's Coordinated Assault. This is after attacks have been declared. A Crone Crusader is going to make a soldier. There's, of course, going to be a trigger for the favored Hoplite, giving it yet another +1/+1 counter. It's also going to get first strike and another point of power. And I think that Josh just took it. So he took 5 damage, a pretty nice turn there for Cifka. He's able to leave up Mana Confluence so that he can cast his God's Willing as well. And Silence the Believers is revealed on the top of Josh Utter-Leyton's library. But just as importantly, while he's only on 2 lands, he's got enough mana to operate now.
And we see with God's Willing and Launch the Fleet, Cifka still has some action. God's Willing also, in addition to being good against Bile Blight, could theoretically force some creatures through the green blockers that Utter-Leyton has if Utter-Leyton doesn't have access to Bile Blight, if he taps out to play one of these threats. I think what we see Cifka doing is setting up a big Launch the Fleet turn, or at least trying to do that. Also, relevantly, if Utter-Leyton doesn't remove the Ordeal, it threatens to deal 3 damage next turn. Either hitting the Courser, making sure that whatever, if it blocks, it dies, or just going straight to Josh's face.
And Josh is just going to pass the turn back with his 4 mana and his blockers.
4 mana, a very important number right here. Unravel the Ether can target the Ordeal before it fires while still leaving Bile Blight mana up, preventing Cifka from proactively using that God's Willing. Satyr Hoplite for Cifka here. Not the best top deck. You have to think he's wanting to look at a Phalanx Leader, but still a threat, still live, still something that Utter-Leyton has to think about.
For those of you new to Pro Tour Sunday, we're watching the first quarterfinal match. What we do is we line them up. We're going to watch all 4 quarterfinal matches in a row, and then both semifinals followed by the finals. So we've got an exciting day of Magic lined up for you that will culminate in our champion winning a whole bunch of stuff. $40,000, platinum status, a seat at the World Championship. The list goes on.
I'm bringing up the card Launch the Fleet now. It's a little bit of a weird card, a Strive card central to the deck. Cifka is setting up a big turn where he can make a lot of tokens with this card. He's got 3 creatures that can potentially attack, access to 4 mana. Right now, he seems to be just nickel and diming Josh down with that favored Hoplite, but Josh has got to be prepared, especially next turn, for as many as 4 additional attackers. And Josh being fairly constrained on mana, there's not a whole lot he can do to stop that, especially knowing that God's Willing is in Cifka's hand.
Yeah, interesting. Cifka also has very carefully engineered this board such that there's nothing that Josh can target that'll get 2 creatures with his Bile Blight. He's going to have to settle for a 1-for-1 here, and he really does want to use up his mana here. Cifka's managed to build up a big threat with the favorite Hoplite and get in for 13 total damage here over the course of this game, but he's looking to go wide going forward. We're going to see a lot of soldier tokens thanks to Launch the Fleet and the Crone Crusader, and he's going to try to go wider than Josh can go wide here. You know, to the point where Josh can play like a Prognostic Sphinx and Cifka can just say, sure, whatever, attack with everything.
Right, exactly. When we say go wide, we mean basically just play a lot of different creatures as opposed to building one creature up to be particularly large. And what we're seeing there, I mean, Josh had to use Unravel the Ether essentially to gain like 3 or 4 life. I mean, he prevented a counter from getting on the Hoplite. He didn't take 3 damage. I mean, so, you know, it is what you have to do, especially the limited number of targets. But the Ordeal did a lot of its dirty work already, making that Hoplite into a threat that could attack by itself.
All right, so Bile Blight takes down a Crone Crusader. And yet another missed land drop here for Josh Utter-Leyton. He keeps revealing good cards. These are all relevant spells. This one's a Hero's Downfall, but he can't seem to get ahead on mana.
Was that just a really quick pass the turn from Josh?
It was.
And without Bile Blight, all of a sudden these Launch the Fleet tokens are going to matter a whole lot more. Cifka able to really commit to a Launch the Fleet without God's Willing protection. And you know, Courser can only eat one of those tokens.
I mean, normally you'd think that if Josh Utter-Leyton reveals Bile Blight, Silence the Believer's Hero's Downfall, he'd be in pretty good shape here, but it's starting to get a little bit sketchy down on 7 life. He does have enough mana to cast Silence the Believers, though, to potentially take out a favorite Hoplite. But God's Willing hanging around in Stanislav Cifka's hand, and we have to remember that Josh knows about that as well.
Right. Josh saw the hand from Thoughtseize. Josh just so constrained on mana, not really able to deploy multiple spells a turn. Ashiok, Prognostic Sphinx, just not very good right now. Would require him to tap down both of those Sylvan Caryatids. And Cifka right now just doing the math, figuring out how he can force through the maximum amount of damage.
And here's Launch the Fleet on all 3 creatures, leaving up his Mana Confluence. Able to cast God's Willing. He's going to get counters on 2 of his 3.
And those Launch the Fleet tokens, while they don't have haste, they are put into play attacking. So those 3 1/1s going to be getting in the zone this turn. I think Cifka trying to decide if he wanted to commit to playing a Crowan Crusader first to get an extra token out of it. But he says, you know, three with haste, reasonably good right now, and I want to leave up God's Willing, given that I know about Silence the Believers and Hero's Downfall.
Yeah, this is a tough spot for Josh Utter-Leyton, just unable to hit his mana. He's going to block like so.
Yeah, we're going to see that Silence of the Believers. Josh has to fire it off right now, even though he knows about God's Willing. He's basically essentially making Josh commit next turn to the Hero's Downfall and getting rid of one of those Caryatids when Josh is already constrained on mana.
Huge deal here, and Josh is going to take 3 damage this turn, knocking him down to 4 with only 2 creatures, desperate for lands. It doesn't feel like it's too late. I think Cifka only has 1 more card left in his hand.
Yeah, and it's an Crowan Crusader, which is just not particularly powerful right now.
So this
is going to be a land?
It is not. Wow. Another non-land. This time it's land-like with Sylvan Caryatid, but Josh Utter-Leyton does have enough mana to cast that Hero's Downfall here, though.
Yeah, he can cast Hero's Downfall on the Hoplite and block twice. So he's only going to take 2 damage and can kill one of Stanislav's creatures. I mean, Josh is in bad shape, but this game is not over by any stretch of the imagination.
Not at all. This is going to be a very close finish. It won't take much for Stanislav to win, though. Any number of cards can win for him. And down goes the favored Hoplite. It did good work for Cifka, but finally it dies. A soldier token dies. And Josh falls down to 2 with Cifka having 4 threats on the board. He really needs to hit a land, start drawing, and he can't do it. A Courser of Crufix. He does get to cast the Caryatid, meaning he's not dead unless Cifka can find a way to target. He taps the table because he wants to be able to target as a Crowan Crusader. Really anything could kill Josh here. There's so many options in Stanislav Cifka's deck that could just finish this game.
And now Cifka a big choice because, I mean, he can tack Josh down to 1, but Josh has a Courser on top of his deck. So if the top of Josh's deck is finally a land, he can play the Courser and gain 2 whole life.
Yes.
I mean, we're seeing right now why Drown in Sorrow is so powerful out of the board.
All right, so a Crowan Crusader is added to the board, and once again, Josh Utter-Leyton cannot find a land. He has been stuck on 2 lands forever.
And every single one of those mana generated by a Caryatid is 1 fewer blocker that Josh has.
It looks like Cifka's going to be able to win game 1 here.
I mean, the question is with Cifka, like how can you attack? You know, if Josh has anything, this attack is suddenly very, very bad for you, or at least fairly bad. You're losing what little board advantage you have, and you know at any moment Josh is going to have a land on top of his deck. So the question for Cifka is just when do you bite? I mean, he's really quite land flooded for a deck that only plays 20 lands, but he knows that he does not have inevitability. The longer this game goes, in general, the worse it is for Cifka. So Cifka has to try to decide when to attack.
And Cifka does not attack. He plays his land, can't find anything to target. His Crowan Crusader, and another non-land card on the top for Josh Utter-Leyton. Josh is really stuck here, right?
Josh is stuck, but he now does have the Hero's Downfall, so he can at least interact. Cifka, bypassing the turn, gave Josh a turn's worth of meaningful interaction, so Cifka kind of forcing himself to draw live here. Oh, okay.
Okay, so this is Dragon Mantle for Stanislav Cifka, creating yet another soldier token.
And
unfortunately, Josh can't tap his mana. He needs to tap one of his Caryatids in order to cast Hero's Downfall, and he can't do it. He has to force Stanislav Cifka to move in here, and Cifka obliges him. Block, 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 kill, and Stanislav Cifka takes game one. Josh Utter-Leyton, terrible circumstances there, had all the tools needed to win the game, yet was stuck on 2 lands for the duration. Never found that third, even though he had a Courser of Krufix in play, giving him access to yet another resource for hitting that land.
Yeah, 3 Caryatids, 2 Coursers, exactly what you need. But the other half of his deck, double Ashiok, Prognostic Sphinx, not doing a whole lot. And then, of course, no lands with which to leverage those Coursers.
All right, why don't we take a look at the sideboards for Stanislav Cifka here to start off with. Zach, walk us through what's going to come in out of the board.
So I was talking to Even Flock earlier during a deck tech, and he said basically, you're a 20 land deck, so you don't have that much room for fancy sideboarding. Most of the sideboard dedicated to beating other aggressive decks. You see 4 Lagana Band Trailblazer, 4 Ordeal of Heliod. The cards that could be relevant in this matchup include Chain to the Rocks to deal with Courser of Krufix. Brimaz, King of Erexos, very important here because as your opponent has more removal and more Drowns in Sorrow, you just need a threat to stick without having to cast a bunch of cards to pump it up. So I think Brimaz is important here. I think Mogus's Warhound, very important here, as you can power through those Caryatids as blockers and through the Courser as blockers, as well as surviving Drown in Sorrow. The thing, what that does, though, is up your mana curve. You can deal with that when you're on the draw, more likely to have 3 lands. On the play, it is hard to cast Brimaz and Mogus's Warhound on time. So I think he's definitely going to bring in all of those for Game 2. Game 3, if we get that far and he's on the play, I don't know how much of that you can afford to have. My guess is probably all of it, but definitely a little bit less likely to be able to come out on time.
Yeah, we'll see these aggressive decks sort of tweak what they're trying to do. Sometimes they try to stay as lean and mean as possible. Sometimes they try to beef up with a few more threats, like with Brimaz or Mogus's Warhound. Why don't we take a look at Josh Utter-Leyton's sideboard and see what he has. We heard David Ochoa mention a key card in this matchup, Zach. He mentioned Drown in Sorrow.
Yeah, and I think Drown in Sorrow, I'm thinking on Stanislav's side, I don't know if you board out Launch the Fleet because of Drown or if it's just so good you keep it in, or whether you board out the Ordeal of Porphyros. But from Josh's side, I mean, Bile Blight, huge. Stanislav makes a lot of tokens, and you need the instant speed removal anyway. Silence the Believers, 4 mana, not that great, but I think you probably need it. A, because you're siding out a bunch of semi-dead Ashioks and Prognostic Sphinxes anyway. And, if the game goes long enough, you can just totally wipe the board. Feast of Dreams, ordinarily good against the heroic decks, very good against the blue-white heroic decks. Against Cifka, though, it targets Mogus's Warhound enchanted creatures enchanted by Dragon Mantle. We don't even know if Ordeal of Porphyros stays in, so I think you have to bring in Feast of Dreams, but it's not going to be live that often.
Yeah, does he have any actual enchantment creatures to hit with it? I don't think
Again,
he does.
only the Mogus's Warhound.
That's the only, yeah.
I believe. And, the last thing you want to get is stranded with Feast of Dreams against a Brimaz King of Erexos. But the key card here, by far, is Drown in Sorrow. I mean, we saw how important the tokens were last game. We saw how powerful Launch the Fleet can be. We saw how vital a Crowan Crusader can be. Drown in Sorrow deals with all of that and allows you to scry, getting you closer to further removal spells and some of those key defenders that you need in order to make the game go long. In terms of what to side out, I mean, Ashiok just not at its best in this matchup. Even when Ashiok hits and you're going to be able to play, your opponent's creatures only cost 1, but you don't have any of the targeting spells to make those creatures good. So I think Ashiok, basically at its weakest here. I don't think you need 4 Prognostic Sphinx. I think Dissolve is extremely weak. I think Unravel the Ether is relatively unexciting. So I think those are the cards you board out, but you definitely need Courser of Krufix, Sylvan Caryatid, Hero's Downfall. Kiora the Crashing Wave, also not great here. You might board that out before you board out all the Prognostic Sphinx. I can see keeping in a couple once your opponent creates like one large creature, like we saw that Favored Hoplite, in order to be able to neutralize that. But I actually think Thoughtseize is very good here for the reasons we talked about earlier. Basically, if you hit one of your opponent's only creatures or you hit a key God's Willing, makes your opponent's offense just far less likely to be cohesive.
Yeah, Drown in Sorrow, of course, a big nod to the presence of potential aggro decks in Josh Utter-Leyton's sideboard, and you can see he's got the full 3 there. And all of those are going to be coming in. We're going to be keeping a close eye for that. If you haven't watched a lot of this matchup before, which, well, I don't think really anybody's watched a lot of it, that's going to be a key card. If you see Josh Utter-Leyton fire off a Drown in Sorrow, that is going to be a key part of the game and put him potentially in the driver's seat to try to even things up at 1 game apiece.
Yeah. A card that Cifka doesn't have that a lot of the other heroic decks have is Ajani's Presence, the ability to give a creature +1/+1 and make it indestructible. But Josh's key removal spells are actually Silence the Believer's Drown in Sorrow and Bile Blight, none of which actually destroy a creature. So Ajani's Presence would only be able to deal with Hero's Downfall. So the fact that Cifka doesn't have access to that card, I think less relevant in this matchup than it could possibly be for other matchups, because it doesn't actually match up that well against Josh's removal.
All right, looks like players are just finishing up the shuffle after the sideboards there. Pretty rough one there for Josh Utter-Leyton. I mean, you got to figure if he hits a land drop out of any of those last 3 or 4 turns, he can start turning this thing around, get that second Courser on the battlefield, start gaining a couple of life, start stabilizing. And, you know, it's pretty trivial once he gets to the point where he's removed most of the threats or has enough blockers and starts ticking up his life total, but just unable to get there.
Yeah, I mean, that game was actually not a short game. I mean, that game lasted, you know, a lot more turns than you would have expected looking at Josh's side of the board. But, I mean, he was stuck on 2 lands. It's hard to complain too much because you had, you know, 3 Sylvan Caryatids, 2 Courses of Krufix, Bile Blight, Hero's Downfall. I mean, you had all the tools, but it just without the land, you know, he had enough lands to cast his spells. He didn't have enough lands to cast multiple spells in a turn and start gaining life off those coursers. So, I mean, pretty brutal string of cards on top of the deck for Josh. You can't expect that that's the way variance would fall on him in the second game.
I mean, would you call it devastating, or do we want to save that for a little later? It was pretty devastating, to be honest. Like land, or you know, reveal after reveal after reveal. Now, Josh Utter-Leyton is very mentally tough, but I mean, that can be incredibly frustrating. Think about it next time you're playing, you know, and you just need that one land, and you draw, and it's not there, and it's not there, and it's not there, and it's not there, and it just gets increasingly more frustrating. But you can take a look at Josh Utter-Leyton down in the feature match area and ice water in that guy's veins. He's pretty chill.
I mean, that is the advantage of having done this, you know, 4 times before, is that you understand that Magic has variance. You understand that you've got to play the next game. And the more you beat yourself up for game 1, or the more you sort of bemoan your fate, the less focused you're going to be for game 2 and less capable you're going to be of winning the game.
Cifka, on the other hand, looks quite content with the way things went in the first game.
I think so. I might be a little bit less content with this mulligan that he's taking. I think mulligans are pretty huge in this matchup. There's so many ways to go 1 for 1, and you just never want a mulligan against a deck that can cast Thoughtseize. I mean, it's just very unlikely for your hand to be able to come together. I mean, you need a lot of stuff to work out, but one of the disadvantages of playing a deck whose mana base is essentially split down the middle, 6 plains, 6 mountains, 8 dual lands, is that, I mean, you've got to get the right combination of creatures and boost effects. Then you've got to get the right combination of land to cast them. You can't have too many land. You can't have too few land. So, you know, one of the advantages of a deck, by contrast with, you know, 4 Sylvan Caryatid, 4 Courser of Krufix, something like 12 Temples, is that, you know, you just keep a lot more opening hands.
All right, so Josh looking to recover from a tough game 1. I think that you know, he's got to feel like he could have won that game had he drawn some lands, and it's got to make him feel more confident going into the second and third game potentially, especially given that he's got to bring in his sideboard. You know, BDM had a chat with David Ochoa, who helped test the matchup for Josh Utter-Leyton, and Ochoa, you know, one of the first things he mentioned was Drown in Sorrow out of the board, how important he felt that is. So while he couldn't quite finish off there in the first game, now he has a lot more tools with which to do so, and this thing is certainly not over.
In general, one of the things that's been said numerous times about the blue-black-green deck that Josh and Channel Fireball teams are playing, is just how potent it is after sideboard. I mean, you have basically the exact combination of 60 cards that you want for a given matchup, but a recent change to the Pro Tour making the quarterfinal rounds best 2 out of 3, as opposed to what they used to be best 3 out of 5, means that the game ones are weighted just that much proportionally more. And the fact that Ashiok's had those Kioras and those Ashioks in the main deck that just were very weak in this matchup leaned positively for Stanislav. Look at the way Josh shuffles his deck. I'm
He's
glad
the only one that shuffles that way.
He just kind of powers the cards into each other. Got to make sure that you've got sleeves, because I can't imagine having their deck last the entire tournament through that.
All right, a good thorough shuffle here of Stanislav's 60-card deck.
Did it look like Josh mulligan too, or did he keep his first time?
Well, I see Cifka just with his cards face down on the table, so that does lead me to believe that there may be a mulligan here, and there is. And it's a keep for Josh Utter-Leyton, so he's going to stay on 6 cards. Does Cifka have a keep as well? He does. All right, so we are underway here. Game number 2, Cifka up a game.
So a big opening hand. Is that a black source? It's not. You see Josh keeps in at least a couple Prognostic Sphinx. Josh has a handful of double black cards, not the black mana to cast them. He can get Sylvan Caryatid, which will open that up. Double Drown in Sorrow, huge here. Bile Blight, almost exactly what Josh wants. He just needs that second untapped mana source to cast Sylvan Caryatid. The key in this match is going to be how fast out of the gates Cifka can come out.
Yeah, so far so good. Satyr Hoplite for Stanislav Cifka. The games when he doesn't have a 1-drop or when things have gone awry for him, so this is pretty standard issue. Josh Utter-Leyton, a second Scryland. He's deciding whether to keep that card or not.
Yeah, I mean, I think what he wants here is a second black source. If he doesn't have that next turn, he can't fire off Drown in Sorrow, meaning Cifka can deploy 2 creatures to the board. If, on the other hand, Cifka plays that Hero of Erois that we know is in his hand, he basically just gets torn up by a Drown in Sorrow right away. I mean, so Cifka, I think, just needs to do some risk analysis to see what's likely to happen to him next turn. He knows Josh kept the card on top, so he knows it's live.
Oh, he's tapping 2 mana here, and he didn't play the Ordeal of Perforos, so there it is. Hero of Erois. Pass the turn back. Is there a swamp on top? It is a swamp for Josh Utter-Leyton, and Drown in Sorrow is going to sweep away both creatures of Stanislav Cifka. Get a scry for Josh Utter-Leyton, and he passes the turn back. So stage 1 to getting back on track for Raptor here, complete.
Yeah, now just favorite Hoplite or Deal of Perforos for Cifka. Launch the Fleet, very good card, but not when you only have 1 creature on the battlefield. Huge top deck last turn of that swamp for Josh. Without the Drown in Sorrow there, Cifka's creatures would be out of Drown range this turn.
Pass the turn back after playing the Hoplite. He has 1 red mana up, so he could target it. But here it is, Courser of Kruphix for Utter-Leyton. That's more like it, he says. Finds immediately a swamp. There's another land on top of his library that he's going to draw next turn. Gains a life back. And this is a lot more how Josh Utter-Leyton had this matchup drawn up. Things progressing nicely for him in the early stages. Remember, both of these players mulliganed. Josh well on his way to effectively unmulliganing as Stanislav Cifka puts Ordeal of Perforos on his favorite Hoplite. There's a trigger, so now it gets 2 counters, one of them from being targeted, one of them from the attack. You can take a look at Ordeal of Perforos. If you've played a lot of Limited in this format, you're going to be well aware of this card, love it or hate it. If you haven't, you probably haven't seen it. It hasn't really seen constructed play. But these Ordeals are quite powerful. We saw basically all 5 colors of them at one point or another during the course of the weekend. Each color gets its own Ordeal. We've also got a viewer area set up here in Atlanta for the Pro Tour. And take a look here. There's some people from the public.
Players are already showing up to check this match out. We've, if you're in the Atlanta area, we definitely encourage you to come by. We've got a huge area set up to watch this top
huge.
8.
We have a massive screen out there, which is fantastic. All right, so Josh is going to block the attack, and there is no effect. So Josh takes nothing, and he's going to reveal Silence the Believers off the top of his library. Like I said, things going much better here for Josh Utter-Leyton in game 2.
I mean, Cifka does have God's Willing, meaning he's going to be able to survive any of the removal spells Josh puts out, and that Hoplite is big enough to survive a Bile Blight. So, I mean, Josh still needs to figure out a way to put this game away and a way to deal with that Hoplite, because, I mean, Cifka is going to be drawing more and more live cards, and with God's Willing in his hand, he can basically afford to just load up the Hoplite and start attacking. You know, we're going to see the Ordeal of Perforos deal 3 more damage. Yeah, Cifka not in a great position right now, but it's certainly not the end of the world.
Okay. Sylvan Caryatid here for Josh Utter-Leyton. And there is another attack with the favored Hoplite, which is going to trigger Ordeal of Perforos. When the creature gets that 3rd counter, you sack Ordeal of Perforos and get to deal 3 damage to something. You can target a creature or a player. I'm assuming that he decided to target Josh Utter-Leyton with that.
We've got the sideboarding back from Cifka and Utter-Leyton. Looks like Cifka actually took out Mogus's Warhound in favor of Brimaz. Looks like he needed to keep his curve down. Josh boarded out 2 Unravel the Ether, 1 Dissolve, 1 Ashiok, and 3 Kioras for Silence the Believers, Feast of Dreams, Drown in Sorrow, Bile Blight. Looks like just not enough cards to board out for the cards in the sideboard you want in.
Looks like Cifka's tanked out here. Maybe he's deciding where he does want to aim that Ordeal. If he has any type of burn spell or anything like that, he can try to take down the Courser.
Yeah, I think he threw the Ordeal at Josh. I think the question is just, yeah, what he's going to cast, if anything.
All right, so it's Bile Blight. That is going to save it. God's Willing, though, says no, sir, and favored Hoplite grows even larger. But again, the real problem for Cifka, take a look at the top of Josh Utter-Leyton's library. That is Silence the Believers right there. And the land drops keep flowing. The life keeps getting gained.
So I'm trying to figure out exactly what happened there. It didn't look like Bile Blight would have killed the Hoplite.
He wouldn't have been able to block with the Courser and kill it.
I think if he blocked with Courser and God's Willing happened, the Courser would be dead. But I'm not exactly sure.
I think Josh's plan was to Bile Blight, shrink it down, and block with the Courser, but Stanislav couldn't let that happen, and Josh did it before blocks.
Right.
All right, now here's Silence the Believers to finish off that favored Hoplite. And now a land go here for Cifka. And it's looking pretty good for Josh. He's got a long way to go to actually kill Cifka, but with the board state at this stage of the game, Josh's life totals at, call it 15, and under absolutely no pressure whatsoever. You got to figure like he's in the full driver's seat here as Cifka says draw go. There is at least 1 Ashiok still floating around in Josh Utter-Leyton's list here.
Yeah, Josh only boarded out 1 Ashiok. He took out 3 Kioras, though, so Ashiok, I mean, it's not horrible in this matchup. It's going to always be hitting creatures, if nothing else, just throwing out some blockers. So it definitely makes sense to have some number of them in after board. And yeah, this game, Josh, this is exactly how Josh wants to see this game going. He's got removal spells in his hand. He has multiple Drowns in Sorrow. Cifka just basically nothing on the battlefield. He's got Phalanx Leader, but nothing to pump with it. And now the Courser's just going to start nickel and diming Cifka out of this game.
And here's Ashiok. Josh is at 16 now. Cifka's at 14. He's going to drop to 12 this turn, and there's nothing. No creatures there for Ashiok. But Ashiok's now at 5 as Cifka falls to 12 here.
And one of the downsides of having Brimaz in the deck is that Josh could hit that off of Ashiok, and that is suddenly very bad news for Cifka.
That's a clock. All right. All right. Josh Utter-Leyton jumps up to 17. Cifka's at 14.
And Cifka, handful of cards, double coordinated assault, launch the fleet, phalanx leader, or deal of Perforos. But I mean, just all those pump spells and no targets. Phalanx leader, even if he goes in, just only going to pump itself.
Yeah, Josh has 5 cards in his hand. There's just no way that that thing's going to survive. Sylvan Caryatid off the top. There's another removal spell.
Yeah, I think what Cifka's trying to do is just draw another creature, set up a big turn where he pumps the Phalanx leader. Josh has only seen one Hero's Downfall, so he's not going to be able to kill both huge creatures, and Cifka going to have to hope that's enough. Not a great plan, but Bile Blight, Drown in Sorrow, the Drown in Sorrow at sorcery speed, not going to be able to really meaningfully kill anything on Cifka's side of the board. So Cifka just going to try and play around the Bile Blight and the Hero's Downfall as best as he can. But, I mean, he's obviously in a very, very bad position right now.
He's also got 6 lands on the battlefield in a deck that curves out at 3.
Right.
Though, if we look at his hand, he does have all spells here. Double Ordeal of Perforos, Phalanx Leader, double Coordinated Assault, Launch the Fleet. Like you said, though, Zach, he really needs something like an Akron Crusader, something to spit out a bunch of tokens to really abuse that Phalanx Leader. Even if he knows it's going to die, he can instant speed target it a couple of times to get a big effect. But, man, it's just not going to happen with the hand that he has as he falls down to 8 life here. Ashiok keeps ticking up. Nope, going to tick down this time and going to make a favorite Hoplite.
Just increasing the clock, providing Josh with some more blockers. A Brima is a big top deck for Cifka. Josh does, however, have the Hero's Downfall, so Cifka, a lot of cards in hand, but no way to protect Brimaz. Stanislav could still pull the trigger with a Phalanx Leader, a Brimaz, and an enchantment, at least threatening to have 2 fairly large creatures. But, I mean, Cifka knows exactly what Josh's hand is, knows about the Bile Blight, knows about the Hero's Downfall, so even though he has a lot of options, not a whole lot of progress he can make.
All right, and there's Hero's Downfall for the King of Oreskos. Also remember, Cifka's down to 6 now. Those mana confluence are pretty sketchy for him.
Yeah, and right. Josh threatening lethal on the next attack could, I think, get another creature with Ashiok if he wants to. Oh, no, he's just going to tick it up.
All right, so we are moments away from Josh Utter-Leyton winning this game, and there it is. We're going to get a Game 3 in our first quarterfinal match. You got to love that as a viewer. And again, Josh Utter-Leyton stuck on a couple of lands in the first game, but not on that game. Everything firing on all cylinders, and you saw what his deck is capable of. You know, it's a bug control deck, and he brings in even more controlling cards out of the sideboard there. And super, super brutal for Cifka.
Yeah, I cannot overstate how good that Drown in Sorrow was, and specifically having the untapped black source to be able to cast it. You think if you're Cifka, there aren't that many swamps in Josh's deck. Yeah, it looks like he has 5 total swamps and 1 mana confluence to be the second untapped black source he needed. So
yeah,
with that 2-for-1, I mean, Cifka was never really able to mount that much more of an offense. One God's Willing just was not enough to power through that Bile Blight and that the Silence the Believers.
Yeah, I mean, Josh Utter-Leyton started things off with 2 Scry lands, and it was kind of interesting because on the second one, he picked it up and he looked at it for a while. It was a swamp. It was what he needed to cast. He needed that second black source. He also had a Bile Blight in his hand, like you mentioned, so he really needed it, but he did think about it for a second and maybe put a little bit of doubt into Cifka about exactly what was going on, but when it came down to it, boom, hit the swamp, swept the board, and that was it.
Yeah, and of course we have perfect information. So we have this whole, is he going to top deck? Is he have Drown in Sorrow? But of course from Cifka's side, I mean, it could have been any number of things. He knows about Drown in Sorrow, but he doesn't know if Josh is trying to draw to the Sorrow, if he's trying to draw into a land, if he has all of that and just wants to know if he needs a Bile Blight or some other removal spell. I mean, even if he's looking for a second, some other mana source to cast Courser Kruvix. So I mean, it's very hard when you're in this position under the lights to to intuit somehow what exactly your opponent is looking for. I think Cifka basically was saying, look, if I untap with a Hero of Eros, he had Ordeal in his hand, he had God's Willing. He was basically saying, look, I know you only have 3 Drowns in Sorrow. It's not as though you can mulligan until you hit that, or mulligan until you hit a Drown in Sorrow plus the mana to cast it. Sometimes you just have to say, look, I can't play around everything. If you've got it, good for you. If you don't have it, I'm probably winning this match.
Right. Why don't we take a look at Courser of Crewfix? It was a card that we saw in the first game that tried valiantly to find Josh Utter-Leyton extra land drops, but could not. But in the second game, it actually did find him quite a few. This is, I mean, probably the most important card in the block format. You're going to be seeing a lot of Courser of Crewfix over the course of the day today. Why is this card so good in block?
I think there's 3 reasons. Each of them is a line of text on the card. The first is that it's a 2/4 creature for 3. I think one of the reasons we haven't seen that many aggressive decks is that this card is ubiquitous, and 4 is a lot of toughness. The second thing is it lets you play lands off the top of your library. Now, what that means is that essentially every time that you play a land off the top, you're drawing a card. In exchange, you're giving your opponent a lot of information, but the card advantage most of the time makes up for that. The third thing you can do is gain a life every single time you play a land. Now, 1-2 life, that matters, but it's not a whole lot. But one Courser over a long game, or multiple Coursers over the course of the game, can add up to a lot of life, and it allows you to play cards, as we see in this list, like Thoughtseize and Read the Bones, while still knowing that you can make that life back if the game goes long enough. One of the
Mana Confluence.
Yeah, Mana Confluence, too. We see one of those in Josh's deck. We've seen a lot of copies in other decks. Patrick Chapin, I think, playing 4. One of the downsides of Courser, or upsides, depending on what you want to do with it, is that it's an enchantment. We see a Naya deck in the top 8 with 3 copies of Destructive Revelry. Courser, obviously, a great target for Revelry. On the other hand, if you're doing something like Eidolon of Blossoms, the fact that Courser is an enchantment is actually a pretty big advantage. So any way you look at it, Courser, I think you could convincingly say either it or Sylvan Caryatid is just the defining card of the tournament, and certainly one of the most, if not the most powerful card in Theros block constructed.
Let's take a look at Drown in Sorrow. Not nearly as powerful on a broad scale, but when you narrow it down to a matchup like this, this is the card to look out for. You saw it in Game 2. Josh Utter-Leyton on turn 3 had his untapped black mana source to fire off Drown in Sorrow and kill 2 of Stanislav Cifka's creatures and really just completely take him out of his game plan. Drown in Sorrow, mainly a sideboard card. We have seen a few in the main decks, I think, of some of the decks floating around. How important is that going to be for this particular matchup?
I think without a doubt it's the most important card in this matchup. I mean, you could argue Bile Blight, I think, also, but, you know, Drown in Sorrow, we've seen other bug control decks, and the Channel Fireball teams kind of split down the middle as to whether they wanted to main deck 4 Kiora, 4 Ashiok, and 4 Thoughtseize and gear up against other control decks, or whether they wanted to main deck Drown in Sorrow and gear up against aggro decks. So one of the big incentives to be playing black in the format, period.
All right, looks like we're underway back in the feature match area, so we can head down there and let's get Game 3 underway. You know, we had a pretty rough Game 1 for Josh Utter-Leyton, and Cifka was just able to eke it out. Game 2 went much better for Josh, as Cifka wasn't really able to play much Magic after his initial start, but now we get Game 3 of our first quarterfinal match. And Cifka's going to keep his card on top with his Temple of Triumph. And you're going to be seeing a lot of this today, too, as well. A lot of temples being played in block. Just scrying in general is kind of everywhere.
Yeah, it is. One of the key attributes of Josh's deck right now, he drew his 1 Kiora the Crashing Wave that's still in there, and no Sylvan Caryatid. Also another landlight hand, but a Feast of Dreams that he could cast on turn 2 if any creatures are enchanted. We see a pair of favored Hoplites, a Phalanx Leader, and a Coordinated Assault for Cifka. Cifka might want to run both those Hoplites out there, but that is asking for a beating from Bile Blight. Really interesting sequence of plays for Cifka, because if he suits up a creature with Dragon Mantle, he exposes it to Feast of Dreams. So even though it's only turn 2, Cifka has a lot of big decisions to make right now.
Yeah, it looks like he is on the verge of making that decision. Plays his land for the turn. plays favorite Hoplite, and he's going to put Dragon Mantle on it. So this is very good news for Josh Utter-Leyton, as he doesn't have the Bile-Blight in his hand. He has the Feasted Dream, so he can just take out the Hoplite right now if he'd like. Yep, Feasted Dreams, one of the premier new cards from Journey to Nyx, at least for limited.
Wow, is that a Brimaz King of Oreskos for Stanislav? Oh, but doesn't have the third untapped land.
He's got other plays here, though. It was a Brimaz off the top. Get that card as well, and he's got Phalanx Leader here. Not too threatening on its own, it's just a 1/1, but man, that thing is scary. A lot of players have died by letting that stick on the battlefield for a turn too long, and Josh isn't going to be one of them if he can help it.
What Josh needs now is an untapped land that gives him access to Courser, to Drown in Sorrow. I mean, just really gets him going.
All right, so he does find the untapped land. Courser of Krufix hits the battlefield, revealing another Courser of Krufix, but that means that Stanislav Cifka gets to untap with all of his mana and Phalanx Leader in effect here. So building forward, and he has favorite Hoplite and Dragon Mantle, so boom, right there, counters on both of those creatures, and he gets to draw a card.
Now, I think he's trying to figure out, does he attack? What can the attack do right now? That Phalanx Leader, a 2/2. Oh, and another land, big right now, opening up Coordinated Assault with God's Willing mana open. And with that Coordinated Assault, Cifka can basically play around Drown in Sorrow right now.
He's got to get the toughness of all of his creatures above 2 to do that. One of them already is there, and he can easily make his Phalanx Leader 3 toughness as well. He has 2 different instant speed ways to make that happen, in fact.
So Josh right now could theoretically block on the attack with Courser. I mean, Cifka can make his creature into a 4/2, I think, without any tricks. The question Cifka's thinking is, does he want to attack? How does he want to attack? And what does he want to do depending on whether Josh does or does not block?
Phalanx Leader hits the red zone, and Josh does not block. This is interesting, though. Stanislav Cifka is going to use his Coordinated Assault. That is going to ensure that both of his creatures are safe from, one of them safe from Bile-Blight, the other, and both of them are safe from Drown in Sorrow here. If he just wanted to pump, he could do that as well. Now, you notice that he's left 1 mana open here, which is going to be a big red flag for Josh Utter-Leyton, as Stanislav Cifka could have used the red mana to pump up the fire-breathing effect from Dragon Mantle and gotten in for a whole extra damage and decided not to, which, again, is going to be a big red flag, though Josh is going to find out exactly what's going on in Cifka's hand. He's basically going to force Cifka to fire off this God's Willing right now if he wants to use it. Otherwise, he's going to have to let Josh take it or Brimaz King of Oreskos. So again, we go in the tank with Stanislav Cifka, hands on head.
What he's thinking about right now is, does he want to preemptively give something protection with God's Willing, or will that even matter against Island and Forest untapped from Josh? I think you just let Josh Thoughtseize right now. If Josh had a removal spell, he could just play another black mana and be able to play around your God's Willing after he Thoughtseized. I mean, which would be even better for Josh. So I think you have to know that Josh isn't trying to set up anything tricky right now with the Thoughtseize and the God's Willing. And Brimaz, one of your most powerful cards. I think you have to just let your opponent take something. But obviously a big moment right now for Cifka. Cifka's deck, very hard to play because just every decision can make or break the game.
Yeah, these aggressive decks are very punishing to mistakes. You just don't get to sort of massage your way out of the mistake. Sometimes with a control deck, you start scrying, you start drawing cards, and you can veer off the path a little bit and find your way back on. But with these aggro decks, you don't get a chance to do that. You make one wrong step and you miss a damage here or there, and your game's done. Cifka trying his hardest not to do that here, and it looks like he's going to go for God's Willing.
No, I think he's just letting Thoughtseize resolve.
You're right. He's just going to let Thoughtseize resolve here, so he's going to show Josh Utter-Leyton God's Willing and Brimaz.
And I think that's exactly what you have to do. I mean, both Godswilling and Brimaz really some of the best cards in your deck, and just throwing away the thoughts, the Godswilling, if that's what Josh is going to take, is just, I think, not worth losing your Brimaz. Also, Josh falling to 14. I mean, there's a lot of power of creatures on the battlefield. Josh still meaningfully constrained by black mana. Cifka doesn't necessarily know that, but he does know that he doesn't ever have to play around, for example, Drown in Sorrow and Bile Blight, or Bile Blight and Hero's Downfall. Josh pretty limited, although the one Kiora he left in could potentially become very powerful if he's able to get one of those big threats off the battlefield, as it would neutralize the remaining threat. We're talking a lot about Brimaz, King of Ereskos, and why it's so powerful in the format. I mean, the reason is basically all of Stanislav's other creatures he has to cast a bunch of enchantments on to make powerful. Brimaz really can just take over a game by itself. 3/4 for 3 with Vigilance, already very good, but whenever it attacks, you get a 1/white Vigilance attacking cat. Similar when you block. The blocking is relevant because it means it can block and kill a Courser of Krufix. So we see why Stanislav sideboarded this card in, as basically Josh has to kill it or it gets out of hand very quickly.
Josh kind of awkwardly here doesn't have spot removal in his hand. He has a Drown in Sorrow that's past its expiration date. Second Courser Forest Prognostic Sphinx with another Prognostic Sphinx hanging out on top of his library. And this is apparently just a huge decision for Josh. I mean, he is really, really thinking this through.
Well, and it makes sense.
He's going to take God's Willing here, Zach, and play his Forest to gain a life back up to 15 and play a second Courser.
So second Courser means that every land he plays gives him 2 life. Now, he doesn't have double black for any removal. The God's Willing huge, not only because it allows him, Stanislav, to get through Josh's blockers, it also can negate Kiora's activated ability, essentially setting up a counterattack that just kills Kiora right away. So God's Willing, basically the best card Stanislav could have in that position, but giving Stanislav access to Brimaz, not exactly what Josh wants to do. On the other hand, Josh is able to contain Brimaz with those pairs of Coursers of Krufix, but Stanislav's still able to get tokens, and in order to kill Brimaz, Josh would have to double block, taking a lot of damage from Phalanx Leader and Favorite Hoplite.
Yeah, Stanislav Cifka is going to get a nice attack in here, it looks like.
Stanislav did not want to draw that Plains that turn, though. Stanislav's deck really, once it gets to about 3 mana, does not need to draw any more lands.
And here they come, both of them.
And I mean, I think if you're Josh, you just have to take this damage. You cannot really afford to lose any of those Coursers, or Brimaz is going to be a bigger problem for you. But you can double block.
It is 10 damage. Okay, so Cifka is going to trade off his Phalanx Leader for 1 of the Coursers, and here's Brimaz hitting the battlefield, and these are some big draw steps for Josh Utter-Leyton. We know that one, and there's second black mana source, and just as importantly, it's a land, basically drawing him a card and maybe getting him to some removal. It does. Hero's Downfall incoming, so things went very well there. Are we going to see Kiora the Crashing Wave here, Zach?
I think that's exactly what we're going to see. I mean, another option is just playing out Prognostic Sphinx, which could block, basically everything, but that just opens up to you to a top deck from Cifka. So right now, Josh has a blocker for Brimaz. Cifka's Hoplite neutralized. Cifka really needed a top deck that turn in order to be able to meaningfully threaten Kiora before Hero's Downfall gets in play.
Right now, he does not have the ability to do that. He can get at Kiora for a damage, but the net result here is that there's going to be a block potentially on Brimaz, and then Brimaz is going to be downfallen by Hero's Downfall, and it looks like Josh will have nicely stabilized the board at that point.
Oh, no, but a big top deck from Cifka. Mogus's Warhound gonna enable Brimaz to get through and generate a 1/1 cat. And even if Hero's Downfall comes in, Cifka still has a Warhound with which to attack. So now the question's going to be exactly what to attack right here. But even still, just drawing an extra card and getting that second black for Josh, just a big, big turn last turn.
But it looks like Kiora All right, so one of them is attacking Josh. One of them is attacking Kiora. He must attack with that cat. That's why Cifka did that, even though it's just going to get eaten. So Kiora down.
And it does mean that if Josh decides to chump block or Brimaz with Courser, that Josh would take an additional damage.
Second hero's downfall revealed off the top. Pretty ideal here for Josh. He's at 12, relatively stable life total. And does he just need to take a turn here to kill Brimaz? Now, the interesting thing here is he can do it main phase, but then Mogus's Warhound gets to actually attack. If he does it inside of attacks, he risks Stanislav Cifka drawing a God's Willing and blanking that hero's downfall. What do you like here? What level of risk are you comfortable with, Zach?
Well, you've got a Courser of Krufix back to block Mogus's Warhound, so I think that you don't care that much if Warhound attacks. You're still at 12 life, so you've got a little bit of room to work with here in terms of your life total. I do not think you want to let Brimaz attack again. Basically giving your opponent a cat for no reason. You can block it, but then again, that means you don't get to block the Warhound or Brimaz that turn. So,
well, I mean, if you make that play, you get to block the cat, so the cat doesn't matter.
Well, right. I guess what I mean is that you don't get to block the Warhound immediately.
Yes, that's right.
And you give basically Cifka another turn to draw something like Launch the Fleet that can really take advantage of the extra creature.
Exactly. So Josh is going to upkeep, take out Brimaz, and that's going to allow him. Remember, Mogus's Warhound must attack each turn if able. So that is going to get eaten by the Courser of Krufix. It does mean that Josh is going to take a hit here.
And just Cifka drawing blank after blank after blank. I mean, he could have used another Warhound there. A Dragon Mantle would have been good. Even an Ordeal of Perforos just to prevent the Warhound from dying. All could have been big top decks, but instead just his 6th land.
Yeah, I mean, look, he drew the Warhound a couple of turns ago. That was a nice one for him. It allowed him to kill Kiora the Crashing Wave. And here they go. And here's the play that we were describing a minute ago. Warhound in, gets blocked, down it goes. 4 damage to Josh Utter-Leyton is going to drop him to 8. Pass the turn back. Hero's Downfall goes in the hand. There's a Thoughtseize on top of the library for Josh, a much, much less relevant spell this late in the game. But here it is. This is a huge play for Raptor. Down it goes. No resistance whatsoever. And once you see Josh start attacking with his Coursers of Krufix, that's when the pendulum has officially swung all the way back in his direction, and he's going to start taking over. We're going to see, oh, there's another land. Scry this. It's another Hero's Downfall. I feel confident that he'll want to keep that. He's going to be able to play Prognostic Sphinx now and really start beating down Stanislav Cifka, who is just too far behind. And now he's in full misery mode here, right? I mean, look at the cards in his deck that he can draw that matter here. Like, Brimaz is the best, and all the rest are terrible.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that is the thing about playing a deck like Cifka's. You are really relying upon your opening hand of 7 cards. And, he actually took out cards like Mogus's Warhound that could have allowed him to power through that Courser. So, I mean, his deck is full of 1/1s that die to Drown in Sorrow, cards like Launch the Fleet that literally have no game text right now. Thoughtseize from Josh going to allow him to, and able to hit the Ordeal that he really, really needed on the Mogus's Warhound turn. And, just going to be very hard to get ahead of Josh in this situation.
And that's going to do it. Josh Utter-Leyton is our winner in our first quarterfinal match. Stanislav Cifka extends the hand, and Raptor's going to be on to the semifinals with his bug control list. That was a fun match.
That was a fun match. I mean, there were moments where it looked like Cifka was really in the driver's seat. And there were moments where it looked like Josh was able to come back. A lot of back and forth, different tenor of those games. And we saw exactly how important Drown in Sorrow was against the deck full of 1/1s and 2/2s.
Yeah, so that was one of our matches. Now, that one was aggro versus basically control. And we're not going to be seeing a lot of that throughout the course of the day, right? I mean, I think Cifka's was really the only aggro deck in our top 8.
What we're going to see is a lot of control versus mid-range. Even the control deck is kind of a mid-range deck. You're not seeing big late-game finishers from these control decks. You're seeing a lot of incremental advantage, a lot of scrying, a lot of value, pretty resilient threats. But we've got Patrick Chapin's mid-range deck. We've got red-green Elspeth. We've got bug control. We've got Constellation mid-range. I mean, just a lot of value being generated accumulated a lot of incremental advantage, but still a variety of different decks rounding out this top 8.
Yeah, and so there's a nice variety, but I think this was going to be our cleanest matchup as far as one strategy versus another, where a lot of them are going to be similar strategies, trying to go at each other and trying to get some type of card advantage, some type of mid-range type stuff, and we're going to be seeing a lot of that as we go into the future here.
Yeah, and relevantly, Cifka's deck, the only deck not playing Courser of Kruphix, Sylvan Caryatid. So even though we have a lot of different types of strategies here, they're united around kind of a common core of cards. Cifka really was kind of the remaining holdout there. But still, I think we're going to see everything from Fleecemane Lion to Polis Crusher to Stormbreath Dragon to Prognostic Sphinx to Ashiok. I mean, a lot of really kind of awesome cards rounding out this top 8.
Yeah, now for Josh Utter-Leyton, obviously this is huge for him, advancing to the semifinals. He's one step away from the finals. For Cifka, though, he's going to have to settle for his second Pro Tour top 8. He won the first Pro Tour that he top 8'd. That was at Pro Tour Return to Ravnica. He's going to have to settle for a top 8 here.
Yeah, I mean, of course, we say settling. I mean, it's, having a second top 8 is huge. We've seen a lot of Pro Tour champions, especially people at their early Pro Tours. I think of people like Remy Fortier, people like Jan Moritz Merkel, that, won a Pro Tour and then kind of really didn't do a whole lot else from then. I think having your second top 8 proves to yourself and kind of demonstrates to the world that you're not a flash in the pan, that you're here to stay. So still a big moment from Stanislav Cifka.
All right, why don't we have a quick word with Josh Utter-Leyton? He's standing with our own Rashad Miller down in the feature match area.
Thanks, Marshall. I'm Rashad Miller. I'm down in the feature match area with number 13th ranked player, Josh Utter-Leyton. Now, there's a play there where you use Bow Blight on Stanislav Cifka's Hoplite, but it seemed like there could have been another tricky play that you thought might have been better.
Yeah, if I had just Bile-Blighted his attacking favorite Hoplite before blockers, if he doesn't have anything else other than the cards I know about, it forces him to use the God's Willing that turn, which is much better than what ended up happening. It's definitely higher risk, and if he doesn't have a creature, then I don't even have to cast the Bile-Blight that turn, which would work out a lot better because then I can clear out all the soldier tokens after the launch of the fleet. So it seemed like there might have been a winning line there in that game that I didn't take and could have.
All right, that's actually pretty interesting. Now, you're going to be playing against the winner of Jamie Park, who's playing Bug Control, and Patrick Chapin, who's playing Junk. Which one of those would you rather face, either matchup-wise or player-wise?
Matchup-wise, I'd rather face Jamie, I think. I think Chapin tuned his deck to beat Bug pretty well, and he's kind of proved that over the course of the tournament, so I think I'd rather play the mirror than that matchup.
Awesome. Well, there you have it. Josh Utter-Leyton on to the semifinals. We're going to send it back to the booth. Congratulations.
Thanks, Rashad. So you can see Josh Utter-Leyton part really happy, part relieved, right? Getting past the super aggressive opponent in your opening match is always a big relief, and now he gets to move on into the tournament and continue to the semifinals.
Yeah, I mean, and you hear from Josh's answer, he's definitely got a pretty clear preference of who he wants to be matched up against from the other rounds, but it definitely is always kind of a headache when you're playing against a deck that can have crazy powerful starts, and that basically, there's only so much you can do about that. I mean, if you're drawing your opening hands, you're not seeing Coursers of Kruphix, you're not seeing Sylvan Caryatids, your tournament could be over pretty quick. The rest of his matchups, he's going to be able to play longer games, he's going to be able to leverage his play skill. He's going to be able to leverage the edge that he thinks he gets in deck construction.
All right, why don't we head back over to the news desk where Richard Hagan awaits. They're going to set up our next quarterfinal match. When we come back to the booth, though, we're going to be bringing you more Magic action. Don't go anywhere.
All right, thanks very much, guys. I can tell you that this segment is brought to you 60% by the Magic the Gathering Hall of Fame. 40% is sitting to my left. It's Louis Scott Vargas and Randy Buehler. The other 20%, well, you'll see him in a minute, but we're very pleased to have him. Now, Randy, I think it's fair to say that you were neutral as a supporter in quarterfinal 1, pretty much.
Sure.
And Luis, I think it's pretty fair to say by your reaction watching Game 3, you were not. How was Game 3 from your perspective?
It was pretty tense. I thought Josh was actually losing for the most part of the game, but the turn where he got to double block Phalanx Leader, kill the Phalanx Leader, untap, play Kiora, then draw 2 Heroes Downfalls in a row, that's what locked it up. And if Stanislav had drawn a spell that was relevant, in any of those 2 missed draw steps, then I think the game could have gone the other way.
But let's take a look at the bracket and see how the game did pan out. We have Josh Utter-Leyton, our first semi-finalist. He is through. So there you see it, Josh Utter-Leyton, in he goes. And that means we are now turning our attention to Patrick Chapin against Jamie Park, our second quarterfinal here. What a matchup this is. Why don't we start off by taking a look at Patrick Chapin for you, and we'll get a sense of his career numbers. He's 33 years old. He's on the Channel Fireball Pantheon team. There you see him. What a moody photo that is, my goodness me. And he has been all business this weekend, let me tell you, all the way along. It's like, yeah, sure, I'm 3-0. Yeah, right, 8-0 at day one. Great, I made the top 8. He thinks of this as a qualifying tournament for the World Championship. That is the business that he is in pursuit of. Why don't we see how he got here through his rounds? There you see it. 8-0 on day one. He's already beaten the likes of Reed Duke and Paul Rietzel on day one. Back we came, and look at that. Josh Utter-Leyton, Reed Duke again, but this time he lost in round 10. Yuya Watanabe was there, and a real rose gallery, an incredible array of talent that he got past, including Guillaume Wafatapa in 14 before that last round draw with Stanislav Cifka to secure the #1 berth. So Randy, here's his main deck. Why don't you walk us through what Patrick Chapin is going to be doing in about 10 minutes from now?
Sure. Yeah, he's now the closest thing left to a beatdown deck. You know, he's just 3-color, he's sort of junk-colored, green, black, white, and the rest of Pantheon went in favor of a bug control deck, blue, black, and green. They wanted to be more control-ish. He wanted to play Fleeceman Lion and Brimaz, and it's actually very similar to the deck that he did well with at Pro Tour Theros, where up and down the curve, he's just got better cards than his opponents. It's not the most synergy you've ever seen, but at every drop, he feels like he's got super powerful cards. He's actually jokingly called the deck Junk Rares, because it's junk-colored and, you know, Caryatid, Fleecemane, Brimaz. He just thinks up and down the curve. He's got better cards than his opponent, and he's got a more aggressive tilt on the gameplay than what all the control decks are going to do.
Luis, you've paced a Pro Tour field before now, going the whole distance, 16-0 in the past. What is it like looking down at 348 tremendous Magic players that you are currently streets ahead of?
It's pretty interesting. I was telling Patrick, once he was 13-1, he's in the bonus rounds. There's 2 rounds left in the Swiss, but no matter what happens, you're in the top 8. And that feels pretty good. It's a very rare feeling.
It really is. Okay, so I said that we had 2 Hall of Famers beside me at the desk. We have another one waiting with Brian David Marshall, someone who has a stake on both sides of this matchup. Let's get across there. Let's talk to Brian David Marshall, and he is with Kai Buddha.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Easy Chairs. Kai, you are the Zeus of the Pantheon. You know, you've been doing this as long as any of these 2 guys who are going to be playing in this quarterfinal matchup. 2 players who have top 8s in 3 different decades. You were helping Jamie playtest.
Yes,
for
I
this.
did.
How did sides get chosen up?
Well, it wasn't really side choosing. Patrick had played his deck a lot in playtesting against our bug deck, because that's what most people were interested to play. And he didn't feel like he needed more games yesterday. He just wanted to have dinner and then go to sleep, because he felt he was well prepared. And Jamie wasn't so sure what he was going to do, so he asked for help. And yeah, I think I played until 2 a.m. and then slept 6 hours, and now I'm back here to watch them play.
So now you actually got to play. Jamie gets a real Hall of Fame pedigree to help him play against a Hall of Famer. You played Jamie's side of the matchup against Gabriel Nassif, playing Patrick Chapin's side of the matchup, and explain how you guys handled that set of games.
Well, first of all, the decks are very similar, right? It's the same core. You have the green for Caryatid and Cursor, and then you have the black removal suit. And then Patrick went with splashing the white because he wanted to be more aggressive. And Elspeth is also the best card in the format. But most of the guys on our teams are more in favor of attacking with the Sphinx and scrying instead of attacking with the Brimmers and putting tokens into play. So we wanted to play the more controlled version. And that's how it's going to end up. Patrick is going to sideboard into a more aggressive deck, while Jamie is going to sideboard into a more controlling deck. Jamie will bring in the Sword Seizes and another Psychic Intrusion. And I think Patrick will actually board out the Silence the Believers, and he will probably cut 2 or 3 of the Caryatids, and then he will board in his more aggressive cards. He will bring in Boon Satyr, and he will bring in Arbor Colossus, because he just wants to curve out and beat the bug deck before it can stabilize. In mid-game, the bug deck just has better cards, I think. And also the Silence the Believers in the Bug deck are more powerful than the Silence the Believers in the Junk deck, because the Bug deck just doesn't offer multiple targets for it.
Right. And then how difficult, you talk about curving out, how difficult is it to curve out in a deck with 12 Scrylands, and you're talking about possibly siding out the Sylvan Caryatids?
That's the problem for Patrick. That's why I like Jamie in the games after sideboard. It's like, if you look at Patrick's deck list, you're like, okay, turn 2 Fleeceman Lion, turn 3 Burmers. But in reality, that doesn't happen. 12 of his lands come into play tapped. He is playing 25 lands to make up for that. But still, like, if he goes Scryland into Scryland, that's a big advantage for Jamie. Then he's probably already too slow. Like, the turn 2 Fleeceman Lion into turn 3 Burmers, first of all, he has to draw those 2 cards, and then he has to draw the right mix of untapped lands. So it just doesn't happen all that often, I don't think. And then there's Swordseize that can also break that up.
Right. How many games did you guys play?
We only played about 12 or 14 games.
And Patrick Chapin's deck always on the play in those games?
In the first 10 games, Patrick's deck was always on the play, and Jamie's deck came out ahead in 7 of the games.
Okay, there you have it. Kai, thanks a lot. I'll let you go get along the rail and do your cheering, and we'll send it back to the news desk.
Right, thank you.
All right, thanks very much to Brian David Marshall and the great one, Kai Butter. Fantastic to hear his thoughts on quarterfinal 2. We're going to hear Luis's thoughts now. Let's turn our attention to Jamie Park, see how he's got here. From the Pantheon, he's 32 years old, close to $50,000 in lifetime earnings. And there you see him looking pretty happy with that. Thank you very much, he says. 139 lifetime pro points. And you see that top 8 of Worlds, 1999 and 2008. That's 3 decades worth of Pro Tour top 8s. And he is not alone in this matchup for doing that, right, Randy?
No, Chapin's had his 5 top 8s are also scattered across 3 decades.
Yeah.
Pretty cool.
We're all getting older and all getting more and more experienced at the game we love. Let's look at how Jamie got here to the top 8. Here is his 16 rounds. He opened up with a 3-0 in draft, including the marquee matchup in round 3 against number 9 ranked Shuhei Nakamura of Japan. Had a couple of losses, a wobble in block constructed, only 3-2 in block on day 1. Once again, 3-0ing his draft pod. Another Japanese player in the way to win the pod. That was Ken Yukihiro. And then beat Cifka, lost to Chapin, beat Martel, lost to Yuki Ichikawa, and then a pulsating round 16 over Guillaume Wafatapa. Jamie in with a 12-4 record. Luis, here's the deck list, the main deck for Jamie Park. Why don't we see what we can expect out of Jamie here?
So Jamie is certainly the more controlling of the 2 decks. Jamie does have cards that Patrick can't actually stop or interact with, like Prognostic Sphinx being the main one. Mm-hmm. So Jamie does presumably have the ability to answer almost anything Patrick can play. A non-monstrous Fleeceman Lion, Brimaz, Elspeth, they all die to Hero's Downfall. Silence the Believers plays a big part in it. The problem is Patrick has a lot more threats. So Jamie is looking to control the game and kind of out-card Patrick, especially since he's got Kiora. And as the only Planeswalker that Jamie has access to, at least in game 1, he's able to draw extra cards off that and use his 1-for-1 removal spells to kind of trade for Patrick's threats.
Courser of Crewfix, it's a card that is in essentially all the top 8 decks. What aspects of Courser are so good? What's the best bit about it? Is it the 4 toughness? Is it the life gain? Is it just being able to... What's so good about Courser?
I mean, playing the lands off the top is the best part of it. That's what gives you card advantage. It gives you free lands. But the 4 toughness and the extra life gain makes it so good against aggro, where it's still very good against control by just playing extra lands. So it basically covers all your bases. There's no matchup where you don't want Courser in your opening hand.
Mana has been a theme this weekend, Randy, both in the limited and the block constructed rounds. And interesting to hear Kai talk there about the difficulties for Chapin, because in the lovely magical Christmas land of the turn 2 Fleeceman Lion and the turn 3 Brimaz, and Kai's like, no, not happening, and here's why. Just how crucial is Mana going to be potentially today?
Yeah, it's part of the reason that Courser and Caryatid are in 7 of the 8 decks, right? 20 copies of those cards in this top 8, because that's how you fix your mana in this format. It's interesting, too, looking at the bug lists, there's some differences in the way people have approached that. I'd love to hear, Luis, your take on the difference between the Pantheon bug list, which is 26 lands. You guys are only running 24.
Yeah, we felt with the 24 lands, 12 of which are Scry Temples, and the Caryatids and the Coursers, we had higher land counts at points, but we really didn't like playing more than 24 land. I could see 25 being right. I'm not sure if I would want to play 26.
Yeah, meanwhile, Nassif and Cunha were both angling maybe even 27 on the Pantheon side of things. Wow. I guess the 24 land may have hurt Josh in that first game, but
The part of the problem is that unlike Sphinx's Revelation control decks, which we've seen a lot of the last couple of years, there's no way for the bug deck to get out of having 10 lands in play and drawing one card.
no, totally fair.
You have no multi-card draw besides something like Read the Bones.
Now, what are the other differences between the two bug lists that have made this top 8?
The main one is that in Josh's list, the list that I played as well,
Right.
as well as my team, we have 4 main deck Ashioks. And I think that's just the biggest fundamental change. I mean, the numbers are different from some of the removal spells and some of the one-of that we played, but the fact that we have all our Ashioks in the main deck, I think, is the biggest change.
Now, does that affect the matchup against Chapin at all?
I think it does. I think Ashiok's really good in this matchup because Chapin's got a ton of creatures, so a turn 3 Ashiok, none of Chapin's creatures can kill it right away, and it can threaten to put free cards into play. I mean, Chapin does have Hero's Downfalls, and he has Banishing Light, but those are going to be overstressed already.
Now, does that mean that Josh should be happy to face Chapin in the semis? Or it sounds like he preferred the mirror.
Yeah, I think part of it is that Chapin beat a lot of bug decks and said he liked the bug matchup, and we assume he's played a lot more. I mean, they did some playtesting, but when Chapin says this is a great matchup and he beat it a bunch, we kind of have to take his word for it.
All right. Well, it's time again. The magic, it keeps on coming. Across 3 decades, Jamie Park and Patrick Chapin have been entertaining us and bringing us great magic. Let's hope for another classic matchup. It's time for the second quarterfinal of Pro Tour Journey into Nyx.